The chandelier above our family dining table cast the same warm light it had for 20 years, but tonight it felt more like an interrogation lamp. I sat in my usual spot at the mahogany table, watching my family arrange themselves like a tribunal. Sunday dinners at the Martinez house had become less about catching up and more about cornering their disappointment of a daughter. I'm Sofia Martinez, though lately my parents introduced me as our daughter who's still finding herself at their country club gatherings. At 29, I was apparently the family failure for choosing to live in a modest apartment while building something they couldn't understand. Sophia, you're 10 minutes late, my mother Carmen said, adjusting the fresh orchids in her crystal vase. Everything in this house screamed success. Italian marble, custom millwork, imported rugs. All evidence of the empire my father Roberto had built with Martinez Construction Group. My brother Miguel was already seated, his Rolex catching the light as he scrolled through his phone. Beside him, my sister Lucia smoothed her designer dress, the one that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Both of them had followed the family plan perfectly: prestigious degrees, corporate jobs, marriages to equally successful spouses. Sorry, I said, sliding into the chair that seemed to drift further from the head of the table each week. Client meeting ran long. Miguel snorted without looking up. What client? You mean that little photography thing you do? That little photography thing. If only he knew that Apex Media Solutions, my little company, had quietly become the most sought-after commercial photography and digital marketing firm in the Southwest. But they saw me carrying a camera and assumed I was still playing artist. Dad entered from his study, still wearing his tailored suit despite it being Sunday evening. Roberto Martinez commanded every room he entered, and tonight his expression was grimmer than usual. Now that we're all here, he began, settling into his chair with the authority of a judge, we need to discuss Sophia's situation. My situation. That's what they'd been calling my life choices for the past 3 years. Refusing their job offers. Declining to move back home. Living within my means while they lived beyond theirs, though they'd never admit that last part. Your mother and I have been more than patient, Dad continued, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. We understood you needed time to get this creative phase out of your system. Mom nodded sadly. But Mija, you're almost 30. You can't keep pretending to run a business while we support you. I took a sip of water, watching their faces. They had no idea I'd been financially independent for 4 years. No clue that their struggling artist daughter owned a property portfolio worth 8 figures. They saw my modest Honda and second-hand clothes and assumed poverty. The apartment rent, the car insurance, the credit cards, Mom continued, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin. We've carried you for years, but enough is enough. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so sad. The daughter they accused of financial irresponsibility had been quietly funneling million-dollar contracts to Martinez Construction through shell companies, keeping their business afloat during the pandemic recession. Miguel leaned forward, his wedding ring glinting as he gestured. Sof, I've talked to my firm. They have an opening in marketing. Entry-level, but it's steady income with benefits. And David's company always needs project coordinators, Lucia added, referring to her investment banker husband. Nothing glamorous, but it's a real job. Real job. I bit back a smile, thinking about tomorrow's board meeting where 3 Fortune 500 companies would be presenting proposals for me to approve. But they saw me working from coffee shops and assumed I was unemployed. We've made a decision, Dad announced, his voice carrying the finality of a corporate verdict. As of today, we're cutting off all financial support. No more rent money, no more insurance payments, no more safety net. Mom's tears flowed freely now. It breaks our hearts, but this is tough love. You need to learn responsibility. The word responsibility hung in the air like incense. The daughter they were lecturing about responsibility had been responsible for keeping their construction company from bankruptcy, though they'd never know it. The emergency loan they thought came from First National? That was me. The Henderson development contract that saved them? Also me. Pack your things, Sophia, Dad declared, standing as if delivering a final judgment. We're tired of supporting a failure. You have until next Sunday to find your own place and figure out your life. The silence that followed was deafening. Miguel shifted uncomfortably, probably calculating how this drama would affect his own standing. Lucia studied her manicured nails, staying safely neutral. Mom continued her theatrical crying. I calmly reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it on the polished table with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the room. "That's interesting timing, Dad," I said, my voice steady as steel. "Because I have something you need to see." I opened the folder and spread out the documents inside. Official bank letterheads, legal stamps, notarized signatures. All very real, all very damning. "Actually, I bought your mortgage last month." The words dropped like stones into still water, sending ripples of confusion across their faces. Dad's authoritative expression cracked. Mom's tears stopped midstream. "What are you talking about?" Miguel demanded. I pulled out the primary document and placed it directly in front of Dad. The color drained from his face as he read the header. "Mortgage Assignment, Pacific Holdings, LLC. Your mortgage was sold by First National Bank to a private investment company," I explained calmly. "That company is Pacific Holdings, LLC, which I own completely. As of 37 days ago, I am the legal holder of your home loan." Diego's fork clattered against his plate. "That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money." "Don't I?" I pulled out my phone and opened my primary banking app, turning the screen toward them. The number displayed made Lucia gasp audibly. 12.7 million, she whispered. "That's just one account," I said matter-of-factly. "Would you like to see the investment portfolio? The property holdings? Or perhaps the business valuations?" Dad sank back into his chair like a deflated balloon. His commanding presence evaporated as he stared at the papers that proved his failure of a daughter now controlled his financial future. "How?" he whispered. "How did the family disappointment build a multimedia empire while you all assumed she was broke?" I pulled out another folder, this one thick with financial statements and business contracts. "Let me show you exactly how your irresponsible daughter became more successful than all of you combined." For the next hour, I systematically destroyed every assumption they'd held about my life. The photography studio that had grown into Apex Media Solutions, now valued at $43 million. The real estate investments across 3 states. The tech startup acquisitions. The government contracts. The Morrison Development Project? Dad's voice cracked as he recognized one of the contract names. The one that kept us afloat during COVID? Wine. Channeled through Bennett Enterprises, one of my subsidiaries. The emergency bridge loan when your biggest client defaulted? Also mine. 17 different interventions over the past 3 years, all designed to keep Martinez Construction solvent while I built something bigger. Mom's face had gone pale as parchment. "But you drive that old Honda. You live in that tiny apartment." "I drive a reliable, fuel-efficient vehicle because I'm practical with money. I live modestly because I prioritize building wealth over displaying it." I stood up, gathering my documents. Unlike some people who bought a $3 million house they couldn't actually afford and are now 4 months behind on payments. The silence was so complete I could hear the kitchen timer ticking in the distance. Even the grandfather clock seemed to pause its eternal rhythm. 4 months, Lucia repeated weakly. "Did you think I wouldn't notice when I bought your debt? I know exactly how much you owe, exactly how far behind you are, and exactly what your options are going forward." I walked to the window, looking out at the infinity pool and manicured gardens that had impressed their friends but bankrupted their savings. Dad's hands trembled as he reached for his wine glass. "Sophia, we had no idea." "No, you had no idea. Because you never asked. You never looked beyond your assumptions about what success looks like." I turned back to face them, these people who'd raised me, loved me imperfectly, and ultimately underestimated me completely. "You saw a daughter living simply and driving an older car, so you assumed failure. It never occurred to you that maybe your daughter was succeeding on a scale you couldn't comprehend." Miguel found his voice first. "What happens now? What do you want from us?" I walked back to the table and pulled out one final document. "This is a mortgage modification proposal. It restructures your loan with a 30% reduction in principal, a fixed interest rate of 2.5%, and monthly payments you can actually afford." Mom's hands flew to her throat. You're helping us?" "I'm helping my family. Because despite everything, that's what you are." I placed the modification agreement on the table. "But this comes with conditions." Dad leaned forward, some of his business instincts returning. "What kind of conditions?" "First, no more lectures about my life choices. No more job offers from your friends. No more assumptions about my financial situation or business decisions. I met each of their eyes in turn. Second, Sunday dinners returned to being family time. No more interrogations, no more judgments, just time together as people who supposedly care about each other. And third? Miguel asked quietly. I smiled for the first time that evening. Third, you let me help expand Martina's construction. I have contracts waiting worth more than Dad's earned in the past decade. Government infrastructure projects, commercial developments, residential communities. But we do this as partners, not as a parent rescuing a child. The room was so quiet I could hear my mother's breathing, quick and shallow with shock. There's one more thing, I continued, pulling out my phone. I've been looking at properties for a new headquarters. Something bigger, more central for both our companies. I scrolled to a photo and showed them the screen. I found the perfect building complex. Dad's eyes widened as he recognized the image. That's the old Riverside Industrial Center. The one I've been trying to buy for 5 years. The owner kept refusing your offers because your financial position was too weak, I said gently. But yesterday that same owner sold the entire complex to Pacific Holdings for $67 million. The number hit them like a physical blow. Miguel actually swayed in his chair. I'm prepared to lease Martina's construction 50,000 square feet of that space for exactly $1 per year, I continued. With an option to purchase at cost when your company's finances stabilize. Dad stood up slowly, walked around the massive table, and extended his hand to me with something that might have been pride finally showing in his eyes. Partners? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Partners, I agreed, shaking his hand firmly. As our hands clasped, Mom burst into tears. Real ones this time, not her theatrical performance from earlier. Miguel started laughing, shaking his head in complete amazement. And Lucia, ever practical, was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling David, she announced. He needs to know my sister is available for investment partnerships, not entry-level positions. 2 years later, I sat in the executive conference room of Martinez and Associates, the newly merged company combining construction and media services. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Riverside headquarters, I could see crews breaking ground on 3 different projects, all funded through my investment portfolio. Dad knocked on my office door holding a thick contract folder. The state highway project just came through. They accepted our bid. Excellent, I said, looking up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing acquisition targets. What's the total value? $430 million over 18 months. He settled into the chair across from my desk, looking more energetic than he had in years. You know, your mother still has that mortgage modification framed in her office. The one where I saved your house? The one where our daughter saved our family. He smiled genuinely. She tells everyone at the country club about her CEO daughter now. It's quite a change from the worried whispers about your situation. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the skyline that now included 3 buildings I owned outright. Sometimes the best business strategy is letting people underestimate you. It gives you room to work without interference. And sometimes, Dad said thoughtfully, parents need to learn that success comes in forms they never imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from my real estate agent. The downtown office tower I'd been considering was officially mine. Another addition to a portfolio that now spanned 4 states and multiple industries. But for now, I was content to be exactly where I was. Successful on my own terms, respected for my actual achievements, and finally understood by the family that had accidentally taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving people wrong about you. It's proving yourself right while giving them the chance to see you clearly for the first time. By the way, I told Dad as he stood to leave, are you free for dinner Sunday? At the house. At the house, I confirmed. Mom's making her famous tamales. He paused at the door. Same dining room table? I smiled. Same table. But now I own the house, so we can finally have conversations instead of interventions. The look on his face was worth every moment of doubt, every condescending comment, every assumption they'd made about their financially irresponsible daughter. Some lessons I'd learned are best taught with mortgage papers and perfectly timed revelations. 5 years later, Martinez and Associates had become the largest construction and development firm in the Southwest. The Sunday dinners had evolved from judgment sessions to strategy meetings, with Mom now proudly introducing me as our daughter, the CEO, to anyone who would listen. But my favorite moment came during a family barbecue when my nephew Miguel's son asked what I did for work. I build things, I told him, ruffling his hair. Big things, important things. Like the buildings we see from our window? Like buildings. Like businesses. Like trust. I glanced over at my family, laughing and talking around the same patio where they'd once tried to kick me out. Like families when they need rebuilding. Sometimes the strongest foundations aren't built with concrete and steel, but with patience, perseverance, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth, even when no one else can see it yet. And sometimes, the most beautiful construction project is watching people reconstruct their understanding of who you really are. The mortgage papers that started it all still sit in my office safe, not as a reminder of their doubt, but as proof that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction with yourself as the architect of everyone's future success.